Still a bit dark, huh? All right, everybody. We are live. Facebook is looking real dark. Not really sure what that's about, but we are live on TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube as usual. And today we'll have a fun conversation. We have a client that flew in from the US. So I will have to go and take them to see a couple acres and all of that stuff this morning. So I will only be live for a maximum of about 2 hours before we go and start that situation. And then maybe I'll probably put some of that on social media. So you get to see a little bit of that. But this morning we're talking about how people fund their relocations, how they fund their relocations to Kenya specifically, with us, and what people are doing to make money while they're out here. So there's a couple different caveats in the way that people come out here. You guys learned yesterday about all the different permits, relocation permits, and all of that that someone can use to get out here. There was investor permit. The investor permit was for people who want to do businesses. If you want to own your own business, you need to have an investor permit. There was the ordinary residency permit. Ordinary residency permit is for people that had some form of almost like passive income, had about $2,000 of passive income a month. And they could come through and they could live here and be on the path to dual citizenship, but they did not have working papers, right? So they didn't have a work permit in that situation. And there's a digital nomad permit, the newest permit, and that is for people who either do own a business that doesn't do business with Kenyans, or are working for a company from home and don't really intend to be here long. That digital nomad permit was kind of the answer to, well, okay, if I need a tax ID number for banking purposes or to buy a car, or those types of things, how do I do that while not being on the path to dual citizenship or any of that? So that's what the digital nomad permit essentially was the answer to. So the other permits are specialized. There's like an NGO permit, there's a mining permit, there's all these specialized permits that you would know if you needed them. And the only other common permit is a work permit. Work permits have to be issued by companies. So you have to be hired by that company, and then that company would go to immigration, do what it had to do to issue you a work permit, right? So those are the four basic types of permit, right? Your investor permit for business owners, ordinary residency permit for anyone who can support themselves without working. Then beyond that, your digital nomad permit for folks that are either working online or own a business that is not doing business with Kenyans. And then your last one would be a work permit, which has to be issued by a company, right? You can't do it yourself. Okay, fine. So for the folks that are ordinary residents and for the folks that are digital nomads, how are they supporting themselves, right? And there's a plethora of ways, right? There are some like really cool creative ways that we've come up with. There are some really cool creative ways that our clients have come up with. And that's what we're going to get into today. So the most straightforward way, the easiest, one, is you own a business. You come in as an investor permit, you run your business, you're making money. Okay, fine. Straightforward, not much to talk about there. What we've seen beyond that is some folks will tap into resources like XM Bank, right? XM Bank, EXIM Bank. In the United States, that's a government bank, so your tax dollars are funding that bank. However, the only people who have access to it are X or M. X stands for exporters. M stands for importers. It's the Export Import Bank of the United States government. Now, every government has an export import bank. So if you're not coming to this, country, but you follow me, I know there's a lot of you guys that do that. You're not coming to Kenya, but you are relocating, and you like the way I provide information, so you follow me. You can Google whatever country it is that you're going to, and then XM Bank, and sometimes it won't be called XM Bank, but it'll pop up. So every country has at least one. Some countries have two. Some countries have like a private XM bank and a public XM bank, and they can fund whatever it is that you're trying to do, as long as it has an element of import and export. And then there are mission statements, for everyone's XM bank. So, like with America's XM bank, the mission statement is to either increase American jobs through importing things that that company needs, or export American-made products, increase exports of American-made products. So if you're dealing with that particular XM bank and you can fit in one of those categories, then you can access that government funding. Why XM Bank instead of a regular bank? The reason is that there are methods of funding within XM Bank that don't require any credit whatsoever, right? So that's typically your number one motivator to go with XM Bank. The other thing is that it's a government. It's like a government backed loan. It's like having a an SBA loan, right? So it's a government backed form of financing. So your interest rates might be lower, and typically you can get it done, like with purchase orders, for example, right? So we were talking yesterday about one of the guys from Philly who used to work at Dunkin' Donuts, who relocated here. And then what he did was he got with the local coffee farmers, and then he did a deal where he was essentially the middleman and selling those beans to boutique coffee shops in the U.S. And he used XM Bank. What he did, though, he didn't have the greatest credit, right? He was a Dunkin' Donuts worker from the United States, who was tired of the United States and moved to Kenya. So he didn't have the greatest credit. I forget what it was. I want to say it was in the low 600s. And so what he did was he got purchase orders. Now, purchase orders are not legally binding, so most companies have no problem giving them to you. And the benefit to the company is it locks in the price at typically a lower price. So they're locking in a price that's good for them, but there's no legally binding contract that forces them to buy, right? And so they issue purchase orders, for 500 pounds of beans or something like that. And then he takes those purchase orders to XM Bank. XM Bank does its due diligence and looks into all of those American companies and makes sure that they're legit and all of that. And all of them actually ended up being offered working capital from XM Bank, which is a nice bonus for them. And I believe most of them actually took that offer. So they got a new line of credit for their American business from the American government, from a bank they didn't even know existed. And then they went ahead and made that purchase. So his first deal cost no money. He got the bank to finance it with no credit, all based on purchase orders. And by the time he was done, it was a $1.27 million deal, right? So that's how you use XM Bank. Now, it was hard for him. It took 18 months. He was using Google Voice to call local American, companies, and essentially try to sell them on these coffee beans. And he was calling all the wrong companies at first. So he got a lot of no's. He was keeping track of his sales calls and all that. And I remember the day when he told me yep, I guess got my 1,000th no yesterday. So you got to be able to push through that type of stuff and whatever, because capital is the cheat code. Capital is the hack. If you have money, then you can hire feasibility studies, you can hire marketing groups, you can whatever. But for him, he didn't have money, so he had to make the phone calls 10 hours a day for 18 months. But in the end, he ended up having the entire deal financed. He ended up making 1.27 million off of the deal, and then of course that started a repeat business cycle with those American clients, and it expanded. And he has even more boutique coffee shops that are buying beans directly from him, and his deals are in excess of $5 million a year now. So it just depends on how bad you want it, right? So that's one way that people do it. They middleman deals, right? Another way that people do it is they just go to work, right? So if you can't work here, what does that mean? We have a guy who's currently in the United States because it's currently something called peak season at Amazon, right? And so what he does is he moved here and he had done this Amazon thing before, so he knew about it. It was actually news to us. We thought it was a really cool idea, actually. But he'd worked at Amazon before, and so he knew about Amazon. He knew about peak season. And as we kind of looked into it, we realized that Amazon makes all of its money for the entire year right now. So from Black Friday, right, up until I think it's Valentine's Day, because there's a certain amount of time for like returns from Christmas gifts, Amazon makes all of its money, right? And I just saw a report like yesterday that this was a record Black Friday, which is crazy. It's up 9.3% since last Black Friday. I think we spent $11 billion already on the holiday season, right? As Americans, right? So that's still a very obviously a very valid, and that was online spending, by the way. So that was still a very valid, situation, is peak season, and them hiring extra people. And what they do is they bring in temps. Now Amazon owns the temp agency, which is interesting, but they bring in these temps, and then if you work really hard during peak season, they might keep you, right? So that's the setup, right? Now, so these temps come in and they actually start at like more money than like the regular Amazon employees, but they don't get stock. They don't technically work for Amazon. They work for this other company that Amazon set up just for temp workers, right? It was called Intrepid Staffing Solutions, actually, right? So, okay, that's the setup with Amazon, right? So what does this guy do? This guy picks the spot in the United States. Like right now, I think he's in like San Francisco or something like that. But he picks a spot in the United States that has the highest local minimum wage, and then he goes in and he works peak season for Amazon. He doesn't care about being hired at the end of peak season. All he wants to do is work peak season, right? Which is great for Amazon. And so he actually leaves every like November. He stays at very, very modest, like, what we would call like a motel. Like he stays at a very modest place. He always finds a very modest place where like he's renting a room essentially. And he works peak because he's still an American citizen. So he works for 3 months. He takes all the overtime. He ain't got nothing else to do. He's just staying in this, one bedroom, place. Works all the overtime he can. Last year, he cleared $65,000 during peak, right? So all he did was work peak, cleared $65,000 in those 3 months, came back to Kenya. Sometimes he'll skip one because if you're making 35,000 a year, you can live like a king here, right? So sometimes he'll make enough money where it's like, I don't think I'll work next peak. Right? That one peak carried me through. Right? So he lives in that one bedroom apartment for the 3 months that he's working peak. And when he comes back to Kenya, he has a beach house in Mtwapa, right? Which is a place up the coast, about 2 hours from where I live. It's a different beach from mine, but he has a beach house. He enjoys himself. He has a private driver. He has a private maid. He enjoys his life, and he goes back to America every holiday season, and he works the holiday peak, and that's it. That's all he does, right? So he works 3 months a year and lives his best life the entire rest of the year. So that's an option for some people, right? Now that was like a creative option, and he had like inside information from working in Amazon before. Now, I guess not everybody knows that that's available, but there are other things that work like that as well. Trying to remember, there was a factory warehouse that somebody else did the same thing. I'm trying to remember who it was. The name eludes me right now, but same type of setup. They would go back. This one was in Allentown, Pennsylvania, I believe. They would go back to this warehouse and they would work this warehouse over the holidays where they were doing their holiday, hiring. They would work for those 3 months. They didn't make quite as much money as like the Amazon guy would make, but they would make like 35,000 in 3 months or something like that. And then that would be it. And then from a from a U.S. point of view, um, they're not paying any taxes because they didn't make enough money, right? So from a U.S. point of view, they're getting everything back. Tax time, and so that ends up being an additional kind of mini bonus for them. But that is one of the ways to do it. The other way that we see quite often is remote working, right? So there's a lot of folks that do remote work. And that's the way that they fund their movements internationally is by working remotely. Now, that one is interesting because there are specialists, right? So coders and people who have special, skills and special knowledge, typically in the technology world, that can get away with, you know, doing remote work and making like six figures at it, right? So that's beautiful, obviously. However, there are other organizations. I'm trying to think of the name of the last one that we dealt with. It's something like Apex. But there are other organizations that it's almost like temp remote work, right? So they'll send you an email and they'll say, hey, there's a project. Do you want to work on it? This is what the project's about. And then when the project is done, the work is done. And then you go in and do something else. And so that remote work obviously pays way less than, six figures. But it boils down to what do you need? What's your lifestyle like out here? And what are you doing, right? Some of us have entire household staffs. Okay, fine. But not everybody does that, right? Not everybody needs a household staff or has a household staff. And so their monthly, lifestyle costs a lot less than ours does. So for those people, they can do that. We have some folks that will pursue things like voice acting, right? Because they may have put themselves in a situation, especially our folks that take care of their base needs with like our bond laddering programs and stuff like that. If they have money coming in from the government because they've bought these government bonds and they got enough money coming in to cover all of their basic needs for the next 20 years, that's when people start going after their dreams, right? So we have a very recent client actually who did just that. They laddered their bonds. They got that squared away, and then so their basic needs are met. They get a check from the Kenyan government every month that covers all their basic needs. He went and bought a computer and a microphone and all of that, and he finally started like voice acting and submitting his scripts and all of that. And he has one of those, like Darth Vader type voices, and so he's already gotten, a couple, small jobs, and that's like within months, right? So like he's actually started voice acting because he doesn't have to worry about income, right? So once income's off the table, things change, priorities change, dreams come back that you've given up on, and you have the space to do them all of a sudden. So for the folks who go ahead and invest in the laddering and they take care of their basic income for much less than they ever could in the US, if they ever could in the US, then all of that dream stuff opens up where now you can go do the thing that didn't really make sense while you needed money, but now that like your basic needs are met, now maybe it does make sense. Now maybe you can go do it, right? Like there's a vegan cafe. I would never open a vegan cafe, right? But her basic income is met, right? The national dish of Kenya is called nyama choma. It's grilled meat, right? So I would never open a vegan cafe here. But if your basic needs are met, then you can go ahead and do stuff like that. So the bond laddering, to get those basic needs met. That is a big way that folks that have the money saved up to do it, right? And it's one of the best ways because typically when folks come through and do that, they're secure for at least 2 decades, right? Like right now, I think there's a 25-year bond that's available. These are long-term bonds, right? But if you're trying to make sure that, like, look, if I break my leg, like if something goes wrong, I'm incapacitated, in this new place, I don't want to be concerned about where my money is coming from. I want to make sure that I got it all together. And so let me get this bond laddering in place and then go from there. Right. So a lot of folks that are able, not everybody is able, but a lot of folks that are able, that is absolutely the best option is to go ahead and get the bond laddering done. And then all their basic needs are taken care of. And then everything on top of that is icing on the cake. Right. So that is definitely one of the best ways. It's not the most active way, to get things done because again, not everybody can afford to do it. You'll need somewhere between like 65 and $75,000 to get that done. But if you have that squared away, then you can be set for life. We've had people take loans and do that. Like it's such a great situation to be in, that we've definitely had people like take loans or max out credit cards and all of that, do that, and now you're good for the next 20 years. And so, if they can't pay back those loans or pay back those credit cards, they're Americans. They file for bankruptcy. That's the safety net that Americans have, right? And so that's that. But they file for bankruptcy and they're good for 20 years. So it's a fair trade to them. So a lot of folks are quite attracted to that. It's the kind of government check that you want, right? Because it's not welfare. It's their dividends on the bonds that they could call coupon payments when it's a bond, but it's a dividend on a bond that you bought. Sandra says, I'm definitely interested in relocating. Money is the only problem. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people. Sometimes that's a mindset, Sandra, for real, right? And I know because like I come from the bottom, right? So I get it. I used to be there too, and I would hear people say that, and I'd be like, ain't no mindset problem. I'm broke, and but it was when I got past it and I look back, it truly was, and so and so sometimes it's a matter of because I know it's so cliche to be like, oh, just change your mindset. That's really difficult to do, right? So you can't just like change your mindset. Your mindset has to grow and evolve. And so the people who tell you to just change it have probably never been there. But the one thing that you kind of can change to jumpstart that situation are your priorities, right? That was definitely super helpful, when a mentor of mine was like, "Look, the change your mindset thing is semi BS. It's a very difficult thing to do. It takes 30 days just to change a habit. So how many days does it take to change a mindset, right? But the one thing that you can do is you can change your priorities. That you can do overnight. Anyone who's ever had a baby or anything like that understands you can do that overnight, right? And so if you change the priorities of what it is that you want to do next, things will kind of start presenting themselves to help you achieve whatever it is prioritized, right? Which is exactly how when we're broke, and I've been through this plenty of times, right? But when we're broke and Christmas is coming, it's exactly how Christmas happens for the kids, even though you're broke. Because as Christmas is coming, you start focusing on it more and more and more, and you start changing that priority. And then as you start focusing on it, things just present themselves to make sure your kids have a good Christmas, even though, unbeknownst to them, y'all are broke. Right? You had no idea how you were going to give them a Christmas. You had no idea how you were going to give them a Thanksgiving dinner, and it happens. That can happen here too. It's just that typically it's so far away, like mentally, like it's such a luxury mentally that it doesn't become a priority, and then things don't present themselves, right? So, definitely kind of take notice of like where you are and like how quickly you want to do it. Make it. You don't have to make it priority number one. I don't know what your life is like. You know what I mean? Like I'm not pushing you or anything like that. But if you put it in a priority schedule and look at that schedule, like don't just do it and set it and forget it, right? If you put it like, okay, in the next 2 years, I'm gonna make this leap, and then you look at that, and as the 2 years start coming, it starts going up the priorities, right? Like I'm going to finish this, and then once I finish this, I'm going to remove it from the list, and everything's going to move up. And in that list is the I'm going to start my relocation in whatever 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever, right? As long as you're disciplined on that, it'll present itself. It'll absolutely present itself. We actually have people that just with our referral program have paid for their relocation because we have our integrated GCs, our general contractors integrated, our architect is integrated. So I'm going to meet with a client from America in like an hour and a half, and I'm going to take him to a site where we're going to build his entire family an estate, right? So everybody's getting a house on this 1 acre. There's actually 1.5 acres available. If he wants the extra half acre, he can have it. But we're going to build him all these facilities, right? And so what ends up happening is on these construction deals, we pay 6%, like any realtor would get, right? And so for example, we just did a 3 bedroom, 3.5 bath house for a client from Mississippi, right? And so the 6% on that was $13,000, right? So we got a bunch of folks that just refer. That's all you got to do. You just got to refer, and then that person has to close, right? So you ain't got to do no selling. You ain't got to do no nothing. Obviously, it works better if you refer qualified people because if they don't close, you don't get anything, right? But all you have to do is refer someone to us, and then we close them and we build them a house, and you get the 6%, right? So we have folks that literally make 6 figures a year off of us, right? Because if they refer one person a month, and the average that they're getting is 13,440 actually, but if the average that they're getting is 13,000, right? 13,000 10 times is 130,000. That's not all year, right? So if you don't get anyone for Christmas because Christmas is happening, and then there's another month where nothing happens, but you got one referral that closes every month that you're sending to us, you make $130,000 a year off of those referrals, right? So there's folks that have done that and then have actually paid their way over here just through referrals. So yeah, for sure, for sure. You can our email is in, let's see, you're on which live are you on? You're on TikTok. Our email is in the bio. And you can just throw me an email. We'll send you to the website link that you can sign up as a referral partner. And then you'll have like you'll be able to like track your referrals in there and whatever. And then yeah, anyone you refer to us who closes, you'll get 6%. Like as soon as they pay, you get paid essentially. And there's some people, we've had people that'll hold it. So we've had some people be like, look, I'm going to make referrals to you, but I want a house out there. So how many your referrals do I have to make, whatever. And so if you're looking at 6%, then, you got to make like 17, 19, referrals to get the 100% of whatever you're making 6% of. So they actually would do that. Now, everyone who has done that has had a background as a realtor. So it's like easier for them to like qualify people, and they actually do like a little extra work, which is not required, but like they make sure that people are qualified. They do a little bit of selling because they have a background in real estate, right? So like realtors will come on board and be like, I want my immigration done. I want a full relocation. I want all of that for free. So I'm going to sign an agreement with you that you hold essentially in an escrow account all of my referral fees. And then when I have enough to actually buy the package myself, go ahead and execute the package. So typically what they'll do is they'll get house, land, a brand new car. They'll get their immigration done, all their legal work done, all their tax accounting and all that done. So they'll get like a total package and they'll just do it off of referrals, and it's simpler for them because they work in real estate. I haven't had a layman person do that, right? Because their referral turnover isn't typically as dense as like a real estate agent's turnover. Because what the real estate agent essentially ends up doing is folks that they have some money saved and they're trying to buy, a house, and it's not working out for them, they'll just refer them over. Like, look, especially during when the VCs, BlackRock, and all those guys were buying single family homes in the United States, a lot of realtors made bank off of us behind that because people had their savings together. Like, people saved for 4 or 5 years to buy a house, and then they went out there to buy the house, and here's BlackRock paying 200% of the value of the house, outbidding everybody and buying all the houses in the United States. And then regular, people who were looking for a house, they couldn't get one, right? Because they couldn't pay twice, twice the value of the house, right? And so what ended up happening was those realtors that were set up with us was like, look, you cannot outbid BlackRock. You cannot outbid Vanguard. These I don't know why they're focused on single family houses instead of rental complexes, but you ain't got enough money to outbid them. So how about a beach house in Kenya? You know what I mean? How about go out there, live your best life, and you wouldn't have a mortgage. Like, what you saved up can pay for all of it. And so that was becoming a real good option for people. And so they had a pipeline. So it made a lot of sense for them to be able to do that, and they could really funnel people to us, and then you receive that payment or have us hold that money in escrow and hook them up with something as well. So that was happening for quite a while. Because of that situation, it accelerated. But there are options like that on the table, So that is another way that people finance their relocation. And in those situations, a lot of those realtors, they chose the investor route. So they're like, look, I want an investor permit. I want Airbnbs over there. I'm not necessarily moving over there. I want you guys to manage the Airbnbs and da 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 da. So a lot of them didn't even necessarily relocate. They just had to save up enough money that they could have the investor permit. And then we built them, duplexes, quadplexes, triplexes. There's even one that we did that's an octoplex, right? So there's 4 units on the first floor, 4 units on the second floor, and there's 8 2-bedroom units in there. And they Airbnb them out and make great money. And they make money in US dollars because they do that in a tourist location. They don't just do it in a random location, right? So they're doing pretty good with that. I also want to get in on the infrastructure bond as well. Yeah, infrastructure bonds aren't always available. So they come out. There's been one that came out this year, right? So if you remembered me talking about bond laddering, you need at least 6 or it doesn't work, right? And the 6 have to be strategically placed or it doesn't work. There are corporate bonds that are relatively safe, right? So Kenya's version of T-Mobile is called Safaricom. It's a cell phone company, yes, but it owns the technology that all their digital transactions happen on, which is called M-Pesa. So it ain't going nowhere. Everybody uses M-Pesa. Every business uses M-Pesa. Even the government. Like the only way that you can buy a train ticket in Kenya is M-Pesa or cash. So you either have to go to the train station with cash, right? Or M-Pesa. Ain't no Visa online or nothing like that, right? So M-Pesa is serious. So it ain't going anywhere. They just opened a bond. It's also a tax-exempt bond. They had to go and get approval from Kenya's version of the SEC. It's called the CMA, Capital Markets Authority. So they had to get approval from the government to issue essentially an infrastructure bond, a tax-exempt bond. They guarantee, I think it's 10.4%, so about the same as the S&P 500, and it's a 5-year bond, right? So that's open right now. So that would be something like an infrastructure bond. So a lot of our generational wealth family trust people are buying that bond right now, even though it's a corporate bond. It's a corporation that shouldn't go nowhere, right? And so they feel safe about buying that 5-year bond from Safaricom. The next time an infrastructure bond pops up, it's great that it's tax exempt, but we don't know what the interest rate will be, right? So because eventually the amazing interest rates are going to go they're going to go away, right? So the cost of the bond is whatever you want to pay on it. There's a minimum of 50,000 Kenyan shillings. 50,000 Kenyan shillings is like $386 or something like that, right? So, there's a minimum of 50,000 Kenyan shillings, but it's whatever you want to pay. Typically, when people are trying to use the bonds to cover their lifestyle, we don't do less than a million Kenyan shillings. And the reason we do that is because bonds halve sometimes. And when a bond halves, it'll be like, just for like a real simple type of example, it'll say something like, this bond is 10 years, the interest rate is 15%. Okay, guaranteed 15% for 10 years. Okay, fine. At 5 years, if your investment is under a million, we will give you all of your money back and you're done. You don't get the 10 years. Okay? If you have over a million, we will give you half of your money back. And then the other half rides out to the end of the 10 years, right? So bonds do that. That's a very typical thing with a bond. So if we want people to be taken care of for long periods of time, we want to make sure that if the bond halves, and it only halves once, like it doesn't keep halving, but if the bond halves, then they're still in the game, right? They still have, some money in there, and they'll get half their principal back. So you get a half a million back at that half point, and then, you'll be riding on a half a million going forward. So that's the reason why the million Kenyan shillings ends up being kind of that point for us. And that's why I said, in order to execute the strategy properly, you need somewhere between 65,000 and 75,000, right? Because that's lawyer fees and broker fees and all of that, plus the fee of the bond, right? And so people who are able to do that are able. Hey, what's going on, Eddie? Good to see you, brother. They're able to make sure that their standard, needs are met and go forward from that. Now, this Safaricom bond is really being used by clients that are already here, already have basic income met, and or have trust funds and are adding to their trust fund, right? Because it's a 5-year bond, right? And that's okay. I mean, you can do that, whatever. But typically, when we're trying to make sure you're good, we're using the 20-year bonds. So we're making sure that's like you're good for a while. Because what'll end up happening is in 5 to 10 years, the interest rates on the bonds will be low. They'll be like 7%, 8%, because the demand for currency is going to be low. So what'll happen is stocks will go up and bonds will go down, right? And that's the way it works. And then when bonds go up, stocks go down. Now, in a developing company, they can both be up, because you can have a new stock market, which the Nairobi Stock Exchange is fairly new. And then you can have that need for currency. So like, all right, we want to buy dollars, we want to buy euros, we want to buy, whatever. And so there's a need for currency. And so the bonds are up, right? And so that's the situation we're in now. But Kenya is essentially a first world country at this point, right? So it's getting to the point where that need isn't going to be there probably in like the next 5 years. Now, if you already have your 20-year bond, the interest rate does not change, right? So when the interest rates on the bonds drops below 10, it does not change the interest rate you're getting. So all the folks that got these great bonds now, they will have that for the next 20 years. All right. So that's how that works. And so that's the focus point that you want to be on. If you want to do the bond thing, you kind of want to start as soon as possible before interest rates kind of disappear. Because right now they're hovering around 13, 12, and 11. I think this month's bond has one that's like 11 point something. And then there's a really long, there's like a 25-year, and they're giving like 15 for that, right? Whereas last year they were giving like almost 20. You were getting 18.46, right? And 18.46, if you do the rule of 72, that's like, every nearly 4 years, every 3 years and, X amount of months, your money would double. right? So, if you don't know about the rule of 72, just Google it. It's just a mathematical principle, but it allows you to see how quickly your money doubles based on the interest rate, the rate of return of your investment. So once you're getting up to like 20%, you're talking about every 3 years. Well, once you have your basic income covered, now there are riskier investments, right? So there's something called the Mansa X Fund. You guys can Google that, Mansa X Fund. Mansa X Fund gives 20% return on investment. So how many years to double? Three. 20% return on investment. There's Vanguard. No, I'm sorry, not Vanguard. Vanguard's an American fund. There's Oak Fund, right? So you can Oak Special Fund. You can Google Oak Special Fund. Oak Special Fund's getting like 22% right now, right? It's a riskier fund though. It's riskier than just a bond, right? But again, you're up at 20%. So what is that? Every 3 years your money doubles, right? So what does that look like? If you got 10,000 in there, in 3 years, you got 20. 3 years after that, you got 40. 3 years after that, we're at 9 years now, you got 80. 3 years after that, now we're at 12 years, right? Now we got 160,000, right? So that's the way compounding works. So if you can get those high rates of return, and maintain that, then you can do some really solid compounding, and get some great, returns out of your investments. But you want that safe base first, right? So most of our clients, they do the safe base, which is the bonds, and then they start dealing with like Mansa X Fund and Oak Special Fund. What's the other one? Is it Alcor? There's another fund that did an amazing 60% ROI last year, to the point where like the Capital Markets Authority even like audited their books just to make sure it wasn't like an Enron, and it's 100% legitimate. They made 60% ROI. That's crazy, right? So obviously at 60%, if it's 50%, then that means in 2 years you doubled your money, right? It's 50%. In 2 years it's 100%. This is over 50%, right? So less than 2 years to double your money. It's crazy, right? So there are some really, really awesome funds out here because it's developing. Industry is developing. Infrastructure is developing. In a developed country, you can't get that. Everything's already developed, right? So nobody's paying you anything extra to help them develop out something. It's all already developed, right? So that's why you get, lower percentages. But it's also riskier, right? Things can fall apart. So the biggest risk in investing is that you can lose it all. So bonds are like the safest level. There's levels to this, right? So bonds are like the lowest, safest level, of investing. And then as you go up, 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 then you start. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that you can invest in. There's options where you can call and put, and all of that stuff. So it can get crazier and crazier and crazier, and riskier and riskier and riskier, as you go up. But you can play with all that risk once you have a base, because you don't even know. Like people talk about risk tolerance on the internet like it's something you're born with, right? Like you could go check your DNA and figure out what your risk tolerance are. You have no clue what your risk tolerance is unless you're financially free, or unless you're financially stable and your basic needs are met no matter what, right? So unless you got a trust fund or something like that, and no matter what you do, you're good, you have no clue what your tolerance is. You won't know until you're good. When you're good is when you find out what your risk tolerance is, because you're in survival mode until then, right? So once you're good, then you'll find out whether you have a high risk tolerance, a low risk tolerance, a medium risk tolerance. But if you're paycheck to paycheck, you have no clue what your risk tolerance is. You think you know, but you don't. And when you get in that predicament, in that situation, that's when you'll realize, like, oh yeah, that guy on the internet, he was right. So yeah, once you get there, once your basic needs are met, you'll be all right. Typically, this happens after your full career. So typically, 40 years of paying into a 401k, you get out the other side of the 401k, and you're able to live this way, right? The difference is in the currency exchange. So a lot of our clients are able to essentially access 401k lifestyle immediately upon arriving here because of laddering, right? So they can turn $75,000 into what would be, the whatever, the 1.2 million that they're supposed to get at the end of their 401k if they've made their distributions, every paycheck since, 21 or some nonsense like that. They're able to access that immediately upon arriving here because what you're investing in local currency is at least 6 million local currency, right? And then you're letting that 6 million rock out for you. You'll hear people, especially on social media, talk about, well, all you got to do is get to like, 5 to 6 million. And once you're there, you're good. It's not just dollars, it's units of currency, right? They'll talk about dollars because they're Americans, but it's not just dollars, it's units of currency, right? 6 million Chinese yuan going to do the same thing for you if you're in China, right? 6 million, Russian rupees going to do the same thing for you if you're in Russia. So that 6 million is going to treat you the same way as a multimillionaire would be treated in the United States. That's living essentially off the interest of 6 million, right? So that those thousands you're bringing in are going to convert to at least 6 million local currency, and then you're going to be making your percentage. So if it's 11% on a million, you know, um, then you can expect those payments to come in and be, 6-figure payments, right? So that's what puts you in a position where you're like taken care of because all of the bonds that you're entering at least the million unit level, right? So a million units of whatever currency you're dealing with is typically the baseline. It just so happens that it's easier for you to get to a million units if you're approaching it with U.S. currency. That's all. All of our clients are millionaires. Yeah, that's an astute that's an astute take. Yes, all of our clients are immediately multimillionaires upon arrival. Yes, 100% of them. Yep. For the bonds, do the dividends payments come monthly? No, they come twice a year. That's why you need six. That's why you have to ladder. That's why you can't just buy one bond. So bond payments, they pay you whatever the interest rate is, right? And then they split the payment into two payments that are 6 months apart. Okay. So if I buy a bond in July, which is the seventh month of the year, then typically that means that my coupon payment, which is the dividend payment, right? My coupon payment is going to be June and January, right? So 1 and 6, right? And so in order for me to ladder, I have to time it so that I get 1 and 6, 2 and 7, 3 and 8, right? So that I get a payment every month. So I need 6 bonds timed out properly so I get a payment every month, which means you get 2 bites at the apple, right? So if it's February and I don't like the interest rates in February, because February would have gave me January and June, but I don't like the interest rates in February. I got one more shot in July. Now I can stretch it out. Hey, how's it going? The China was good. China was good. We got a lot of good stuff. So I can stretch it out. Most of our clients try to do it in 1 year, right? So in 1 year, we get what we get. We're set for the next 20 years. Let's go. You can stretch it out, but you're going to be, up and down on some of your bonds then, because what'll end up happening is maybe the first year you got 2 of them, and then the second year you got 2 of them, then the third year you got the last 2, and so now there's a gap in when they're going to expire. They're not all going to expire in the first year and like it's nice and clean, right? But we do have clients that they'll get their immigration done and then they'll wait multiple years before they actually come here, right? Some of them will wait so long that by the time they come here, they qualify for citizenship, right? Which is a strategy. So they'll have essentially a green card, but won't even be in country, and they'll hold that green card for 7 years, And then at the end of the 7 years, they'll come in and apply for dual citizenship because they've held the green card for that long, and then go through the dual citizenship process, and then essentially move here as a citizen, right? So those are for the disciplined long-term planners and that type of stuff. But yeah, you'll need to ladder them so that you have a payment coming in every month. So you need six of them. Each one has to be 1 million, so that you can survive a halving, right? So you need six of them at 1 million each, so that you're good for the next 20 years. So that's why it's like somewhere between 65 and $75,000 to get it done. For our referral partners, that's six referrals. Right. So for referral partners that want to instruct us to build that out for them based on the referrals, that's six referrals. Each referral typically pays about $13,000. So six referrals that close is going to give you, over $70,000. So yeah, for sure. Yeah, Momo. China was awesome. Did some really cool stuff. Definitely upgraded our smart houses. Our smart houses are significantly upgraded now, with some of our Chinese partners. So yeah, yeah, good stuff going on there. You know, you know what is still frustrating to me sometimes is we try to do these projects, for the community, right? That help the community and then give the community, like, an opportunity and all of that. And it's literally like pulling teeth to get the community involved. And so it was like a, I don't know, insult to injury type of thing. While we were over there and we were talking about a couple projects that we're looking to do, and like 20, 30 random qualified, Chinese investors were like, I'm in. I was like, whoa, like we didn't open it to you, you know what I mean? But it was so crazy how easy it was to garner Chinese investment, compared to when I'm trying to get my folks in America on board to get something done, and it's like, mm. So yeah, that was an interesting situation. It's slightly embarrassing, quite frankly. Um, but we'll see. We may even take them on, because it doesn't make sense to have, little old ladies in the village suffering because your people won't put up or shut up, and there's people standing over there that are like, yeah, this makes sense, let's do it, and you're holding out for your folks. So we might even let's go ahead and take them on. But it was a good time. It was a good time for sure. We'll probably be back in April, actually. Yeah, we'll probably be back in April. Folks that are building houses with us, they will have to onboard by. We had a special while we were there, and some folks onboarded, and they got like crazy upgrades for free because we were there. But folks who onboard new houses, probably by February, will be able to go with us to China and essentially like do their furniture shopping and like their interior design stuff, and then we'll put it all on one container. So that cost will be like greatly reduced because they'll all share like the shipping and the container costs and all that, and we'll ship everything back, and then they'll be able to set up the inside of their houses with that. So yeah, but we'll be back probably in April regardless. And then we'll be in the Caribbean in August. Yeah, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, we'll typically be in China twice a year, April and like October. So yeah, I'll open that up soon. I'll probably open it up at like in the new year, like after the holiday season and all that is done. I'll start announcing like anyone who onboards with us by the last day of February will be able to go, because they need time to be able to get like their visa and all of that to go. So we can't do it like right up against April. They'll need time to be able to get their visa processed. And China still puts the visa inside of the passport. So you have to send your passport away for a certain amount of time. Then it comes back with the visa inside of it and all of that stuff. So it's one of those situations where you need some lead time. So what we'll probably do is we'll give March. So by the end of February, then they have March to get all their stuff squared away, and then April, like somewhere in the middle of April, we'll go, and then we'll invite them. We'll take them to the factories where the furniture is made and all of that, and they'll be able to have go ahead and set up their house any way they want it with their internal decorations, interior decorations, and all of that stuff at that point. So we try to pass things along as much as we can. Hey, Mystery, how are you? You guys with the shirts. Oh yeah, yesterday was the insurance shirt. This company I actually did found. I'm not actively in control of it at the moment. I focus on Diaspora Freedom Initiative at the moment, but I founded this company. This time you're right. Yesterday's shirt was not one of my companies. I don't know. So, the some countries allow you to engage with their bonds directly, and some countries don't. In Kenya, which is where we do business, you can, but I wouldn't know. Yeah, I wouldn't know about Ghana or Nigeria. In fact, I'm almost certain in Nigeria you can't. I don't know about Ghana. I feel like we had a client that was already onboarded who asked us to look into that, and I don't think individual people can engage the Nigerian central bank. So you have to go through a brokerage in Nigeria and pay like the brokerage fees. I'm almost positive, if I remember correctly, as we were researching that. But I don't know about Ghana at all. Well, yeah, that's part of the rationale behind the passport portfolios, right? So our generational wealth clients, they always start building passport portfolios so that they can engage with certain countries that don't allow foreigners to engage with their financial markets directly, that they have that direct access to those financial markets. So if that's an important market for you, it's time to start strategizing as how your family is going to be able to access that market in the future. It just depends on what's important to you. Yeah, it's just and then you set that up in your generational wealth plan. Like my son is 19 months old now. He has access to four global financial markets. He doesn't even know how to say that. Right? But he has access to it because of the planning that went ahead of him, right? So he actually has access to one additional market that I do, right? Again, because of the planning, we planned it so that our children will be better off at birth than we are. That we decided that that was a responsibility of ours as parents is to put our children in the best possible situation they can possibly be in. So when our children are born, they're typically born with one additional passport and additional access to a strategic market. than we are. Now, by next year, I will have earned the right to join that market as well. But it's all about your planning. Which one? Well, obviously the Kenyan market and the U.S. market are two of them. But yeah, we don't go too deep into exactly what what people got going on. Don't need the scammers paying attention. Yeah, Eddie. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It comes together. It comes together for sure. You got kids, Eddie? The what? I haven't even heard of that. Hmm. All right. Yeah, man. Actually, that's the best way to do it. That's how I did it. I did all of my planning before I had kids. So when the kids came, they were just plugged into the plan. So yeah, your generational wealth stuff, it works best if you don't even have children yet. If you start that planning and you start that journey before you even have children, it works really, really well. Okay. And it's cheap. And it's cheap. The quicker, the earlier you start, the cheaper it is. We have a couple. We're still trying to get them to sign a media release, and I get it. It makes sense that people don't want to share. Like, yeah, I'm saving $1 million over here, and all the cousins come out the woodwork asking for money, right? So I get it, but there's certain stories that we like the people involved in the story to tell. And so we try to get media releases and like do stories with them. But we have a young couple, man. The girl was 21, the guy was 23, I think, 24, something like that. And they had just gotten married. And they got it set where their kid's going to have over $1 million. And they did that with a combined tax return, which was like $3,200 or something like that. But the interest rates that they got on that, and they don't have any kids yet. They're newly married, no children. We've had people who are newly married, and you know how you get the envelopes at the wedding. We had people that took 25% of the envelopes and came to us and got it set up, and their kids are straight and they ain't got no kids yet, right? So the earlier you do it, the more time you have to compound, and then the easier it is, and they don't have to do any additional payments. That principal just has to compound at a decent interest rate. They don't have to pay every month. And it's not like a 401k, you know what I mean? Will that help? Sure. That'll make more money. Sure. But you don't have to do that. So they're sitting real pretty for their kids and don't even have no kids yet. But generational wealth is real easy if you're early on it. Even if you're not early on it, it's still typically easy. It's just that if you're not early on it, then maybe you're looking at your grandkids. You know. Yeah, man. Yeah, it's pretty slick. I've had like religious people. I almost caught the chapter and verse. So many people have come to me with it. But there's a part in the Bible where it says, a good man, what is it? A good man prepares an inheritance for his children's children. You know how many people then came to me talking about, I heard you do generational wealth for the grandkids. That's what the Bible says. I was like, what? Where does it say that in the Bible? But it does. It actually says that. So there's a lot of folks that'll come in and they'll do that. They'll be like, all right, I'm gonna put down, 5 grand. What are the options? What are the interest rates that are available right now? Cool. I'm gonna let that 5 grand ride for 60 years. 5 grand in 60 years is gonna be over $1 million. Like, that's how compound it works, right? So they'll be like, this is for my grandkids. Here's the 5 grand. It's a newborn present or whatever. And that's it. and the trust is perpetual. The trust will be there waiting. Typically, you want a bloodline clause in those, so like that's the situation where like any kids that are born, so your kids, would end up being DNA tested at, birth, not paternity tested, not necessarily worried about who the daddy is or anything like that, even though that's an added benefit, but DNA tested to connect back to that grandparent, and then that's how you would set that up for for the grandkids, and then if they're related to that grandparent, they would be part of the trust. And then when they came of age, the trustee, which is a company typically full of lawyers, would start paying them. And then that's it, and then you can put in any kind of caveats in there, right? So like we have trusts where like, okay, so the DNA lets you in. Okay, now you're in. Now you have to get financial literacy training. You know what I mean? So you get your financial literacy training and all of that. That's now done. Now we have a really cool one that has an equalization of tiers, right? So what does that mean? They have certain money that comes out of the trust for each degree, right? Now here, there's no such thing as an associate's degree. It's called a diploma here, right? So, but they're Americans. So in their trust deed, it says, well, if you get an associate's degree, X amount of money gets kicked out to you. But they were wise enough to understand that like not everybody needs to go to college. So it's like, okay, an associate's degree is also equal to a trade apprenticeship. So if you're an apprentice mechanic, an apprentice plumber, an apprentice electrician, it equals, right? And then beyond that, if you're an entrepreneur, they set like a milestone. So if you're an entrepreneur at this level of entrepreneurship, it equals the associate's degree, right? And so they have all these different paths that they can go through. And so like now the bachelor's degree is now like, oh well, now you're a novice, right? So you've gone from apprentice to novice plumber. Okay, fine. Master's degree, you're a journeyman plumber. Okay, cool. PhD, you're a master plumber. And so they tiered it off where every level of business ownership has an equivalency to trade school, has an equivalency to academics. So it doesn't matter which direction those kids take. There's still an opportunity within the trust for them, right? Which was really really smart, because some people would just be like Shaq. Shaquille O'Neal has it set up that you have to have a bachelor's and a master's degree. Well, what happens when one of his kids is not collegiate, but they're a master plumber making $250,000 a year, owns their own plumbing shop? He can't be part of the family trust because Shaq didn't think far enough ahead to add an equivalency instead of just a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, right? So that's why you work with professionals who can check you and be like, wait a minute, I know you're not thinking of this, but we've been doing this for 2 decades and we've seen what happens in families. What happens when this happens, right? Or if you're given, however much, $100,000 a year to your descendants, what happens when one of them gets a drug problem? Because the trustee can only do what you tell them to do. The trustee can only do what's in the trust deed, right? And you're not alive by that point in time, typically, right? So it's not like somebody can come ask you, and even if they could, it's an irrevocable trust, right? It's very difficult to change, right? So all of those things have to be worked out in the trust creation process inside of the trust deed. So, okay, if this person, is suspected of having a substance abuse problem, then they need to go see whoever, a substance abuse counselor. They need to go get blood tests. They need to whatever. If they clear all that, fine. If they don't clear all that, we stop paying for their substance, you know what I mean? And now we start paying for the rehab and giving them the support and the help that they need. All of that stuff would have to be in the trust deed for it to be effective, right? So in the world of trust, what you don't know can absolutely hurt you badly, right? And so that's why if you're doing a revocable trust, who cares? It's revocable. But if you do an irrevocable trust and you try to use Chat GPT, you're done. You're going to mess yourself up so bad, and there's going to be virtually no way to get out of it, right? So you want to make sure that for your offshore trusts, your irrevocable trusts, and all of that, your family trust, that you have a professional at play. Yeah, man. Yeah, man. Yeah. I mean, you can absolutely very easily put $5,000 to work and just forget about it. That's what it really is. Just forget about it, you know. And that's the end of that. Because not for you anyway. You ain't got to look at it. You ain't got to keep tabs on it. You'll get progress reports from your trustee company, of course, but you leave it there for the next generation. That's when generational wealth planning works. When you're not trying to tap into it yourself, right? You can have your own wealth plan, but when you're not trying to tap into it yourself, that's when it works, man. Yeah, man. Yeah, yeah, no problem. No problem. Take your time. I'm here almost every morning, every night for you, I guess. I may flip that. I may flip that. I might try to figure out a way to flip that so I'm like on during the day in the U.S. or something. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Background's not going to be the same though. If it's daytime there, it's going to be nighttime here. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Very cool. Very cool. So what time is it? Is it 10:20 now where you are? Yeah. Okay. It's 7:20 a.m. here where I am at. So yeah. All right. All right. So let's see. It is 7:20. I do have a client appointment at 8. Anyone have any questions on how people make money while they're here? Top ways that folks are making money. You got an idea that you want to run by me? Shoot. Do Americans have to pay tax? That's a weird. The question has been worded improperly. Do Americans have to pay taxes is not the right question. The right question is, do Americans have to file a tax return? The answer to that question is yes. America is part of the 3 countries in the world that charge tax, uh, charge a tax liability for having a passport, not for being in their country. Right? All other countries, it's about being in their country. It's about being something called a tax resident, not being a citizen. In America, unfortunately, it's about being a citizen. The only other countries that do that are Eritrea and North Korea. Not a great list to be on, um, but that is the situation for Americans. Does that mean that you have to pay taxes? Not necessarily, but you do have to file a tax return, right? Jesus. Um, how do you file a tax return and not pay taxes? All right, you must be making some good money. Every tax return you file, you owe taxes. You all right? You're making good money then. So you want to go? Flies are messing with me today, aren't they? So you want to go to irs.gov, go to the search bar, and type in Form 2555. And then that form will tell you that if you are abroad and you're making your money abroad, there's something called a foreign earned income exclusion. And you can exclude the first $130,000 you make from U.S. taxes. Okay. So do you have to file the return? Yes. Are you going to pay taxes? Probably not, right? According to U.S. Census data, there's only like something like 12.5% of American citizens that make over $130,000 a year, right? If you believe TikTok or YouTube or Facebook, everybody, 100,000 ain't nothing. Everybody making 100,000. But according to the IRS and the government data, ain't but 12% of people making that kind of money. So, for the vast majority of Americans, they wouldn't be paying anything in taxes living abroad because they would be under $130,000 a year. So, do you have to file a return? Yes. Do you have to pay taxes? Probably not. But what you don't know, you don't know. So if you don't file Form 2555, then you might be paying tax money that you shouldn't have been paying. This is what happens a lot when people are in like do it yourself mode. Oh, I know how to file taxes. No, you knew how to file taxes when you were still in the United States. You are not there anymore. Right? Things have changed. But if you insist that you know so much you're going to do it yourself, then you'll pay for that. Ain't nobody going to call you up from the IRS and be like, oh, I think we owe you $130,000 credit. No, no, they just going to take the tax money and keep it pushing. Right? So you got to have a professional team when you're making a big move. You can't make big moves and think that you can do everything yourself. You mess yourself up. Well, yeah, no, I just explained that. The reason why your buddy is paying taxes is because they don't know what they're doing. I guarantee you, he's filing taxes himself. It's a very simple form. Go look up the form on IRS.gov. Very simple form. Way more simple than a 1040. I think it's only like 6 or 7 lines of information that have to be filled out. It's an incredibly simple form. And it's not the only one. There's the FTC form, which is IRS form 1116 or 1118. One's the corporate version, one's the individual version. But FTC is your foreign tax credit. That's a whole different thing, right? So your foreign tax credit gives you, if you pay taxes in a foreign country, 90% of the taxes you pay get deducted from any tax liability that you owe in the United States. So it's not like there's only one way to reduce taxes by living abroad. Your boy just don't know what he's doing because he's not a tax professional. You're not supposed to know. It's just like I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to heart surgery. I'm not a heart surgeon. I'm not a medical professional. I'm not supposed to know. I'm supposed to go hire a heart surgeon, right? So that becomes the issue. Do you know any pitfalls for someone who is a trader? And you okay, so a commodities trader, gotcha. Physical or like securities? Because like if you're like physical commodities trading would be on, yeah, but is it okay? So like the guy from Dunkin' Donuts, he was trading coffee beans, but physically he was like putting them on a ship and trading them, with U.S. businesses. Or are you talking about like on the U.S. stock market, like commodity, like pork bellies, commodities on the stock market, like as a security versus the physical actual pork bellies? Securities. So securities, it's the same as any other security. You could lose everything. The value of the security could go down. It's all of those things. Those are all the pitfalls, right? Physical, you so we had a lady who had a contract with, was it Heinz or Hunt's? One of them is in Pittsburgh. I think it's Heinz. It was the Pittsburgh one. So she had this contract with Heinz, ketchup, and she was sending tomatoes. So she was doing the commodities, but physical, right? And then there was an issue at customs, and they didn't check like her container quickly enough, and so all the tomatoes like rotted in the container. So it's like she lost the entire container, right? Now of course, she had insurance or whatever, but those are the pitfalls that can befall you if you're trading in commodities, and you're trading in those commodities physically, right? Is that if the commodity is perishable, it could perish, in transport. So that's one of the big pitfalls there. But if it's stocks, like stock commodity, it's the same as stocks. The risks are the same as a stock or an option or anything like that, or derivatives are wild, but all of that that type of trading, the risks are the same. So that's like securities are like one classification of trading risk, right? So there's debt. Debt is bonds. There's securities. So that's like a step up in risk. And then there's like blue chip securities, which are like the riskiest, right? Sorry, any pitfalls with still trading? Oh, no. From the American point of view, you would still be working abroad, right? From the Kenyan point of view, you wouldn't be working in Kenya at all, right? So that's the understanding has to be, and this happens to a lot of people as well, with the kind of like, I know what I'm doing, so I'm going to do it myself, right? They think they know the definition of a word, and they're right where they come from, but they're not right where they are, right? So in the United States, you're working for the U.S. company, you're a U.S. citizen, so you're a U.S. tax resident. They expect a tax return to be filed, right? Or you're, trading on a U.S. platform or whatever. And for them, though, you're working internationally, like you're working from Kenya. So under the U.S. Lexicon, you're a foreign worker, even though you still have to file an American return. It's the same thing if you come on a tourist visa to the United States and your job calls you and says, hey, you need to log in. We need this report from you. Technically, you're violating your U.S. visa, right? Like if they could prove that you did that, you worked in the U.S. without a work permit, and they could, bang you for that. That's under the U.S. lexicon. So that also works the other way, right? You would be considered working in Kenya, which might open you up for the foreign tax exclusion, right? Or the foreign tax credit, or both, right? Even though you're still, working in US dollars, and in your mind, maybe you're working in America, that's not necessarily the legal definition. That's why you need an enrolled agent, or you need a tax professional of some sort to guide you through it. Then on the Kenyan side, under the Kenyan definitions in the Kenyan lexicon, you would be working in America, because that money didn't originate in Kenya and it wasn't paid in Kenya, right? So you'd be working in America. Would you need a digital nomad permit, not a visa, right? Would you need a digital nomad permit? No. No. You absolutely could use a digital nomad permit, but you wouldn't need one. Now, eventually you're going to get to a point where under Kenyan law, you become a tax resident of Kenya, right? If you spend enough time here, you become a tax resident of Kenya. Once you get to that point where you're a tax resident of Kenya, that's where the FTC really sets in, because the FTC is designed to make sure that you don't pay double taxes. So once you become a tax resident of Kenya and you pay any tax to Kenya, and it's not, it's never income, it's always taxable income, right? So whatever taxable income you pay on the Kenyan side, you can deduct dollar for dollar using the FTC on the US side up to 90%. That's actually the only good thing that came out of the big beautiful bill is it got changed from 80% to 90%. Right, that which only affects people who are not living in the United States. So they literally incentivize you to leave the United States. You get the foreign earned income exclusion, right, of $130,000 for leaving the United States, and you get the foreign tax credit of 80% or 90% now for leaving the United States. So if you have the right tax professional and you're getting the right advice and you're filing everything properly, then you could possibly be making an excess of $130,000 a year just for leaving the United States. That's why a lot of your elite, and not even elite, really kind of mid-range elite, right? If you're a billionaire, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? But a lot of like new millionaires, a lot of like lottery winners that actually turn around and plan things out, they'll leave. They won't necessarily give up their citizenship, but they'll leave because they'll know like if you just won, I don't know, $1 million in the lottery, right? So after taxes, there's $1 million left over, 1.1 million, whatever. You just won the Powerball, right? You can live off of that million if they're not crushing you in taxes, right? So if you leave and you come to a place like this and you let that million go to work for you, and then the smaller amount of capital gains tax that you're paying here, you're allowed to deduct dollar for dollar from any U.S. tax liability up to 90%, and then you have a foreign, earned income credit that you can, eliminate the first $130,000. Well, if you're making 10% on $1 million, that's 100,000, right? So you're below 130,000. So you literally remove the entire tax benefit if it's set up in such a way that it's seen as foreign earned income, that you can exclude. So now the essentially the interest on that million that you want to live off the rest of your life on has just become tax free by leaving the United States. If you stay in the United States, you'll be paying tax on all of it. So you're actually incentivized to leave. Yeah, man. Any other questions on that? Ooh, that's a great question. So with the states, you have to end up. Sorry, I was distracted by one of my employees. For the states, you have to set up your like your tax residency with the state, right? And so what you have to do is you have to prove that you no longer have a state tax residency, or there will be state tax obligations. You're right about that. So you want to make sure that you're intentional about what you're doing, all right, with the state, because it's going to be like a preponderance of the evidence if they ever decide to like challenge. No, 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 no. You're still a tax resident of the state of New York, even though you haven't been here for 7 years, right? So you want, there are a bunch of little things that add up, right? Again, professional, right? You need a professional to help you through it. But there's a bunch of little things that on their own don't prove anything, right? So on their own don't prove anything. One of those things, like I have a local driver's license. I have a Kenyan driver's license, right? I don't renew my Pennsylvania driver's license. That's one of the little things, right? That's one of the tiny little pieces of evidence that all get stacked on top of each other to prove that I'm no longer a Pennsylvania tax resident, right? I may not have an address in Pennsylvania, right? I may have an address somewhere else if I need an address. But if I need an address in the United States, and so I pay for like, a mailbox address, I would do that in a state that had no taxes, like Delaware, right? So like you would pick a state that didn't have any taxes, or didn't have any income taxes or anything like that, and you would put your address there because you're not living in the United States anymore. So it doesn't matter. Even our clients who have rental properties in the United States. Well, why would that property be in your name? You know what I mean? That doesn't make sense. You're not even there, right? Somebody falls down the steps. Why would you be getting sued personally for somebody falling down the steps? You're not even in the country, right? So at that point, typically what happens is people will equity strip the property. So they'll take out loans or whatever, and Asante, Mbulex, Mbulex. And so what they'll do is they'll equity strip the property, so they get all their money out of the property, put the property in an LLC after it's been equity stripped, right? And then they'll start renting it out. And if the rent pays for the equity that they stripped, great. If the rent don't pay for the equity that they stripped, bankruptcy, because they don't live there. Who cares, right? They're not in the United States. Their credit doesn't matter anymore, right? So they'll do that, and then if somebody falls down the steps, you can sue the LLC, which is broke, right? So It's a matter of planning. It's a matter of planning, and then being able to prove like, no, 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 no. I personally am not a tax resident of any state in the United States. Even though I'm a federal citizen, I'm not a tax resident of any individual state. And so that's how you handle the state side of things. They don't typically challenge it unless you're like a serious taxpayer. So if you are making big money, $1 million a year or whatever, and they're used to that giant check from you, and then you start talking about, well, I'm not a tax resident anymore. Those are the kind of people that are like, nope, nope, a judge has to decide that. But typically, like for me, I sent them like a letter of my federal tax return, which has my Kenyan address on it. That's another one of those little pieces of the evidence. So I was like, look, this is where my tax return was sent. This is where I filed my taxes from. I filed my taxes from, the Republic of Kenya. I'm not a tax resident of Pennsylvania anymore. And that, and that was it. They didn't push back. But they do have the option of, pushing back and saying that a judge has to decide where your tax residency is and blah, 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 blah. And then that's where all those little pieces of info come in. So again, professional, you don't know what you don't know. I see a lot of people who like leave their social media in their hometown and all of that. That's another one of those little pieces of evidence that they can use against you. How would I know about that? You wouldn't. Yeah, that's the point. That's why you need a professional. You wouldn't. Right? You gotta come to terms with the fact that you don't know what you're doing. Period. It's another country. You do not know the laws. You do not know how it works. You gotta you gotta come to terms with the fact that you don't know what you're doing and get a professional. Can you speak more about putting rental properties in an LLC? Yeah. So you can put a rental property in an LLC. If you don't have a mortgage on it, it's super easy to do. If you do have a mortgage on it, you can still do it. There's something called the Garn St. Germain Act. So if it's a single member LLC or even a land trust, which is a trust that doesn't protect your assets, right? So by putting it in a land trust, it's a revocable trust where you're the trustee and the beneficiary, and because of that, by law, they can't issue a due on sale clause. So they can't be like, oh, you sold it, now we want the whole mortgage, and. So depending on the structure, and you speak to your local people because there are states that have like homestead exemptions and stuff like that, right? So you speak to your local tax person or your local estate attorney to see if there's any little caveats in your local law or whatever. But federally, under the Garden St. Germain Act, they can't do a dual on sale clause if you place the property in a trust where you're the trustee and the beneficiary, right? Because in that type of setup, there is no asset protection in that revocable trust, right? So you can throw it in to an LLC that way, but before you do that, you want to. Well, most people want to equity strip it. Like you don't want to put it into an LLC with all the equity in it, because then when you try to pull out the equity, you need business credit. Because now the LLC has to pull out the equity. So it's better to pull all the money out of the property and then put it in the LLC versus putting it in the LLC first and then deciding you need to pull some money out of the property. Would it be an attorney that handles that or a CPA? It can be a CPA, but it needs to be a real estate investor CPA. It can't be H&R Block. It needs to be a CPA that specifically deals with like real estate investors, so they understand like bonus depreciation, they understand tax code around real estate, right? And then if they're local, then they also understand your state tax code around real estate. That's why you want that local professional for real, is what's different about your state that a federal person might not know, right? And then that homestead exemption thing, an LLC can't be a homestead, right? The homestead is essentially saying like this is my primary home, and that definition might not have anything to do with whether you live there or not, right? So again, you got to know what the local laws on that is. It could just be your first home is your homestead, or you designate any home you want as your homestead, and then none of the other homes can be homestead, right? And so it just depends on how that state, operates. So if you have a homestead exemption and you put the homestead exempt home into an LLC, you'll lose the exemption. So a homestead exemption essentially says that like if you're sued, that one home can't be taken. Now, if you have multiple homes, other homes that are not homestead can be taken. But if that state has homestead exemption, it means no one can take your home from you, right? Because there are certain states that are like, look, no matter what, no matter how much you're sued, no matter what, you're not going to be living under a bridge. If you own a home, the home that you live in is exempt from all of that nonsense, right? And so, you gotta to weigh, all right, does it make sense for me to put this thing in the LLC? Now, when you're leaving the country, typically the homestead exemption thing is not enough. For most of our clients, like typically that's not enough. It makes more sense for them to rip all the money out of that house that they possibly can, still keep it for Airbnbs and all of that. And if something goes wrong, then just file a bankruptcy, and you still be able to file bankruptcy and keep the house, because there are bankruptcies that are designed to do that. Or you just let the creditor take it at that point. We've had folks that came here, they pulled all the money out the house, they did their thing here. By the time things went bad there, they had 6 or 7 houses here, all cash flowing. They just didn't care anymore. They're like, F it, just take the house. Like, I can't be bothered. I'm good. I mean, I'm set for the rest of my life here. I'll be okay. Do what you want. And then there's other folks where the Airbnb, and maybe not even Airbnb, maybe more of a long-term rental situation, but the tenants took care of everything, and that was just the end of that. Like, they didn't need to deal with any shortfalls or anything like that. The tenants paid back the equity stripping, and that was the end of it. So it just depends on the situation. What if you still have a mortgage? It doesn't matter. Yeah, you can have a mortgage on it. You can have a mortgage on it and still equity strip. That's typically called taking a second mortgage. So you can have a mortgage on it and still equity strip and then still put it in an LLC. But you're going to want your local guy to set that up to make sure that you don't trigger any due on sale clauses with that. But you can definitely put properties that you have a mortgage on in an LLC, because you're still responsible for the mortgage, and they can still come and get the property if they need to, because you put the property up as a collateral. So should it be equity? A HELOC is equity stripping. You're trading the equity in your house for the HELOC. A HELOC is a home equity line of credit. So every piece of that credit you take removes your equity. It strips your equity. That's just one way of doing it, though. But there are multiple ways to strip equity out of that. You can do a DSCR loan. You can do a home equity investment instead of a home equity line of credit. So there's plenty of ways to equity strip the property, but that's one way. The issue with the HELOC is typically that it's a variable interest rate. So your year one of the HELOC, it could be 7%. Year two of the HELOC, it could be 15%, right? So that's typically the issue with the HELOC. But especially if you can get a fixed rate HELOC, because they do exist, rock out. The other thing with the HELOC is if you don't pull the money quickly enough and you default, then you might not get access to all of it, because it's like a credit card, right? So when you get a HELOC, you typically get a bank account, and that bank account would have like a number in it. So let's say the HELOC is they give you, I don't know, let's say they give you 70% of your equity, and the 70% of your equity is $120,000. You'll have a bank account that says there's $120,000 in it. And every time you remove money from that account, it starts that credit cycle where now every month the interest is now blah, 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 right? So if you've only taken 30,000 of the 120,000 that's available, and then a default happens, you might lose access to the rest of the equity, because now you didn't make a minimum payment on the credit. You know what I mean? So a lot of folks, what they'll do is they'll rather do like a cash out refinance, where they get a chunk, they get $100,000 cash, boom, and then they bring that $100,000 over here and they build a house. They set up their equity, or not their equity, but their debt laddering with their bonds, right? So that they're getting a paycheck every month from the government. Like they get something done where they're good, for the next 20 years, and then let it default, and then it defaults, and you just, you owe whatever, and then you hit a bankruptcy and clear that default and whatever, versus like having essentially a credit card. A HELOC is turning your house into a credit card, and then you're swiping, and then before you're able to swipe it all, a default happens, and then you lose access to the rest of the credit card. So it depends on whatever your individual circumstances are, and sometimes you can't pull it all at once. So like sometimes there's a limit to how much of the HELOC you can take per day and all of that stuff. Well, I mean, because typically the clients that do that have a brand new house already. So like, yeah, for me personally, with my risk tolerance, if it was a situation where like I took some money out of a house I owned, and then I didn't own another house, and then somewhere in the middle a default can happen, and then I ain't have no house, that probably would exceed my risk tolerance. But typically what the clients who are doing that are actually doing is they're actually building their house over here, right? So like we had somebody who just did that. They had a house in Prince George's County, Maryland, right? Which apparently is a big deal. They were able to take a DSCR on the house and get like 300, so like 70% of the value of the house is like $360,000, right? So they were able to come in. They built a 3-bedroom house with us for $170,000, which included the land, the immigration, all of that, right? So that's 170 out of the 350. They came back, they threw another 70 on it and got their base income done, right? And then got a car, right? So now you own a house, it's off grid. You're getting a check every that YouTube. You just randomly ended. I don't know what that was about. So they got their car and all of that, and then they still had, oh man, I can't even remember what they had. Maybe like $60,000 or something like that. So they still had money left, and then you still own the house in like the short term, right? So now they own a beach house here, 3-bedroom beach house here. They're getting a check from the government every single month. They own a brand new luxury SUV, right? They have a fabulous life at the beach in Kenya. And then there's a house that's been equity stripped, in the United States that they don't live in. And they're Airbnb-ing that, to try and make those payments back. So there's a good faith attempt to make the payments back. Because when you take, typically the kind of rule of thumb is when you take the credit, you got to wait 6 months before you can even approach bankruptcy, right? So they got the Airbnb type of thing going on, and then, it's paying the back. And if that works, then cool. Those people pay back your bank loan. If it doesn't work, and you want to keep the house, there's a chapter of bankruptcy that lets you keep the house. So you file the bankruptcy. If you don't care about the house, you let them take it. We have clients that, because the house they had ain't nothing compared to the house they got, right? So, what you get here for half the money is way more than what you would get in the U.S., right? Like we have a build that's like $450,000. It is a 5,000 square foot, 4-bedroom in suite. Every bedroom is in suite, mini mansion, 2-story mini mansion, right? With a library and an office and a family theater, and it's 5,000 square feet. Go to Google and ask Google to show you a picture of a 5,000 square foot house, right? So, and that's less than $500,000. It's a $10 million house in America. So a lot of folks, like, once they see what they get, they're like, screw it. You know what I mean? Like, that's the last piece of flesh you can get from me, in the United States, and I'm going to live my best life here moving forward. And so, that's a really cool safety net that we have as Americans, that like we can just pull a Donald Trump and file a bankruptcy, and that's the end of it. All right, Eddie. Yeah, no problem. See you later, brother. All right. Any other questions? I got 7 minutes before I have to meet my U.S. client and actually take them to a site where they might be building that giant mini mansion. So that might be something that you guys get to see on the social media. But I have to contact them in about 7 minutes. I will answer any questions that you have. If you're writing a question now, just go ahead and press enter so that I see it, and then I'll wait for you to finish it, or press 1 so I wait for you to go ahead and ask your question. Outside of that, I think I will call it. Hopefully, you guys learned something. Thanks for all the likes and the gifts on the TikTok side. I appreciate you guys for that. It pushes out the live, so thank you for that. Looks like YouTube is good. No questions on YouTube. Looks like Facebook is good. What if you want to keep the U.S. address for child college tuition? You can do that. Or you can buy an address, right? So there are places where you pay like $19.99 for an address. I personally like the buy an address because you can buy an address in a state with no income tax. That automatically takes care of the income tax question as far as tax returns are concerned, because you'll always do a federal tax return. But the state you used to live in might turn around and say, well, hold on, you ain't do a state tax return. We want some money. And then you show them, I got my address is in Delaware. I don't live in your state anymore. There's no income tax in Delaware, right? So, and then like when you're ordering something, like we have like a freight forwarding service that's also in Delaware. So if we order something from Amazon that we want delivered to like Kenya, it goes to this Delaware warehouse. So now on the Amazon site, there's no tax. So the price changes on Amazon, when we order it because our address is Delaware. So, things like that. So for me, I'd rather be able to pick and choose which state. And if Delaware changes its laws, I go find another state with no tax. Alaska, find another state with no tax, and put my address there. California in-state fees versus out-of-state fees, just in case my child wants to go back home for college. Kind of California in-state fees versus out-of-state. Oh, you mean like going to a state college? Well, yeah, so that becomes part of your personal plan. If you know that she wants to go to a state college in California, then that has to be part of your plan. Like, all right, well, I'm going to find the county. Like, so we had someone out there who did that, and they chose, can't remember the name of the county, but the name of the town was Temecula. There was something about that county that mitigated some of like the tax stuff that they would have to deal with. So if that's what it is, and your kid wants to go to a California college, then what you could also do though is you could invest in probably a California 529B plan, which is a college savings plan, and there are discounts for California schools if you're using the California 529B plan. So that might be a better option, but it again boils down to not knowing what you don't know and getting a professional to help you figure that out, right? But yeah, this is gonna be your part of your personal plan. All right. All right, guys. I'm gonna go to work. I will see you guys soon. You might get to see some social media stuff from that. And these lives are my professional. Yeah, definitely. You might get to see some stuff about that soon. So keep an eye on our social media. And yeah, we will get back with you at another time. Thanks for hanging out with me. Hopefully you learned something, and I will be back around this time. I've been here for 2 hours today, so I'll be back around this time or 2 hours prior to this time, whatever time it is where you are. And I'm here virtually every day. All right, guys, talk to you soon.